Welcome to Alienating the Audience, where we go through a wormhole into the nerd sector, because this is a show for people who don't just want to talk about how cool robots are or learn a factoid about nanotechnology. It's a deep dive into what science fiction really means. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton, the thinking man's nerd. And today, we're going to explore the width and breadth of one of the all-time greats of science fiction, Isaac Asimov. If you are a robot, you are going to love this episode. And afterwards, my friend Nick Sperduti and I recently performed stand-up at the International Fembot Comedy Festival, and so Nick comes on to discuss our trip. Hey, you know what? This is the second episode, and it was supposed to come out next week, but you guys got so excited about the Twilight Zone breakdown with Tim Sandifer that I decided to drop an extra episode this week. A lot of people say weekly podcasts should only come out once a week, but I'm a nerd who plays by his own rules. I don't even put my hands on the escalator rail. And if you guys are stoked about this podcast, well, I am too, and we'll do 2 friggin' episodes in 1 week. Now boot up your positronic brain because we're going full Asimov. My guest is Ryan McGary, and what's your connection to Asimov? When did you get into Isaac Asimov?
I just read him ever since I was a little kid. I mean, I think some of the earliest science fiction I wrote besides, Heinlein was Isaac Asimov.
Yeah. I grew up reading, I think Isaac Asimov was the first sci-fi I read. I read Douglas Adams before Isaac Asimov, but I would say Douglas Adams is more comedy who did sci-fi.
Right.
Whereas, Isaac Asimov is like one of the trinity of like really intense sci-fi writers.
Oh yeah, one of the big 3.
Yeah, one of the big 3. And like I grew up reading his robot short stories. Those were the really impactful things to me, like Robot Visions, I, Robot,
right.
All of that stuff. So I know him primarily as the robot guy. And then when I was maybe...
And the Will Smith movie too, right?
Oh, God.
Yeah, just the best thing ever.
An hour and a half of Will Smith pissing on Isaac Asimov's grave. That was just terrible.
Dude.
I looked into that earlier today. Apparently, that was originally like a wholly different movie. They were already working on it, and then they got the rights to the title I, Robot, and then just
slapped the name
slapped it on there and went, there's 3 laws, kind of.
Right.
There you go, virgins. There's your reference to Isaac Asimov. And like, meanwhile, all of us, like, I was like, the only thing you have to do to maintain integrity to Isaac Asimov is just respect the 3 laws of robotics, and you don't have to worry about anything beyond that. You can switch character names, make them different genders. We won't care. We just care about that one thing.
It's amazing how far we've come from then to now, where we actually have nerd movies that are for nerds. Right? Yeah. Back then, it was like, eat this shit, you fucking nerds.
There you go. Yeah. Although I will say, I thought Bicentennial Man with Robin Williams, I thought they did a good job.
I never saw it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I never saw it.
They actually, it's a rare instance of where a film has more content than the book, because it's not a book. It's a short story, right? Bicentennial Man, it might be a novella, but I don't think it's any more than like maybe 20,000 words.
Yeah.
So they had to kind of stretch it out and add some stuff to it, which usually the other way around. But they did a good job, and they maintained the rules of robotics, and they did, I think, what Isaac Asimov really excelled at, which was being able to understand humanity by looking at someone who's not human, right? Because I feel like really good science fiction is it's an exploration of humanity by taking us outside of it so that we can look at it from an objective perspective or from a different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you strip away kind of all of like the emotional aspects of things, you strip away all of the kind of nuance of a detailed story, you can kind of isolate these particular parts about humanity that you want to look at, right? Because you don't have a more thoroughly fleshed out story in a sense. So you can really focus on really narrow aspects of what makes humanity. You can kind of pull it apart, take this aspect, put it into a robot. You don't expect a robot to have all, the full picture of humanity in them, and then you can kind of examine that little piece that you put in the robot.
Which is why I really like the robot stories, because with Asimov, like, the totality of a human is so complicated emotionally, and just so many impulses and all that. What he could do is he could go, all right, I'm going to take it's just a robot. There's very little personality to it, but it's telepathic. Right. How would that manifest? And it basically manifests where the robot, I think the short story, it's called Liar, and it's from I, Robot. One of his recurring characters, Dr. Calvin.
Susan Calvin.
Susan Calvin, yeah. Susan Calvin has the hots for a coworker, and the robot can't cause pain, so the robot lies to her. And it's like, oh no, it's his cousin. Don't worry about it. Or like
that's how she identified the broken robot, was because he lied to her, right?
I think
so something like that.
As I recall, there's a little bit of, like, I haven't read it in 15 years, but there's a little bit of viciousness to it where she like kind of lets into the robot and basically pushes it into a catatonic state because she's so angry,
right?
Which I appreciate, because this is, to me, one of the downsides of Asimov is I feel like him and Arthur C. Clarke both. All of the humans are interchangeable. Like, there's I can't think of, with the exception of a couple of the characters from the Foundation series, I can't think of. I had to Google Calvin. Was it Sandra Calvin? What was her first name?
Sarah. Sorry, Susan Calvin.
I had to Google that, right? Because I couldn't remember her name.
That's one of the few names it's very true. Like, other than Harry Seldon and Susan Calvin and
Harry Seldon and the Mule. Harry Seldon and the Mule are the only two characters I can remember by name in the Foundation series. Because he was very, to put it, I hesitate to say anything negative about Asimov, because in reading about him earlier today in preparation of talking to you, I was like, this guy's one of those few people in history that, like, he's kind of like Leonardo DiCaprio, not Leonardo DiCaprio, Leonardo da Vinci.
He was great.
There's actually very little overlap between Leonardo DiCaprio and Da Vinci.
He really reminds me of Leo during the beach.
Yeah. He's gotten over the Titanic thing. He's still sleeping with models, but there's more depth to him. I think he's similar to Leonardo da Vinci, or maybe like Ben Franklin, where you could take like one aspect of his life and go, he would still be amazing, right? If you just looked at Asimov as a scientist, you'd be like, incredibly impressive guy. If you just looked at him as a scientific explainer, kind of a literary version of Neil deGrasse Tyson, brilliant. But then, so I hesitate to say anything negative about him. However, his writing style is very unornamented. It is very much plot, function, and story, and not a lot of dialogue, not a lot of cuddly characters, not even a lot of characters you dislike.
Right. It's kind of like a slightly warmer Silmarillion.
Who's Silmarillion?
Tolkien. So like the Lord of the Rings, right? And then the Silmarillion was.
Oh man, I'm gonna get feedback on that. I just dropped a big one. I'm gonna get some.
Delete all this.
We're gonna edit that out. We'll edit that part out.
The Silmarillion. So that was like his history book, Tolkien's like history book of all of his big thing. And it's for the most part, it's incredibly dry. I mean, I love it.
Like a text
super dry. It's very similar. And so it's less about the motivations of the individuals necessarily, because there's not a lot of individualism. It's just about this flesh suit has this function in the story, and it will behave in that way. But that's, I think, part of why he was able to examine so many larger concepts, was because he wasn't tied down by little things like personality.
Exactly. The individual is merely a carrier of the plot. They're all ants, and the hive itself is the plot.
That's a great way to put it.
No, I think you're right about that, because it's although I will say, so like, I think broadly speaking, we can kind of divide his fiction opus, or oeuvre, a new term I learned. We can divide it. There's the robot stories. There's the Foundation. And then there's kind of miscellaneous things. And there's a really good book that I read about 2 years ago called The Gods Themselves. And I enjoyed it because it has a bunch of things he never puts in any of his other books. There's aliens, there's sex, and there are human personalities.
Right, which the sex, that's very unusual for Asimov.
Which is very unusual. It's like Heinlein. Man, you can't, like...
Sex pervert. Total sex pervert.
Heinlein couldn't write a pamphlet without putting in, like, a 60-year-old man sleeping with a 22-year-old. Like Heinlein probably couldn't fill out, like, a driver's license form without slipping in a short vignette about some kind of sex, something free love at the bottom. Whereas Asimov doesn't. He early in his career, it's pretty stock 50s characters, which is to say, it's the plucky 30-year-old engineer, right? Which is very much the same as Arthur Clarke. He does have strong female characters insofar as characters exist later on in his development, but he didn't. In reading about him, he thought that he had been imprinted because he started writing science fiction before he dated, and so he really kind of started kicking off his talent and his direction before he really knew women, and so courtship's really not a big part of it.
That's why he had time to write the books in the first place. So that's why you had time to write the books in the first place.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You know what? I was way more productive as a novelist before I became more productive as a lover.
Right. Way happier too, right?
Man, if we, I have to. I'm sure there's. I need to graph this. I need to talk to my friends. Look at graphs and go, okay, now where's the? There's probably like
there's a lot of inflection point.
There's an optimum orgasm level of like if I'm
per week, OGs per week, right?
Yeah, OGs per week. Because if it's like I had an old roommate who is more sexually productive than me in New York, and I was like, what's your trick, man? And he's like, no trick to it, man. You just go to a bar every single night. And I was like, every night? And he's like, take Sundays off. And I was like, you go to a bar every night?
Like it's his job.
I've got stuff to do. Like I'm a bit more of a nuanced person than this. But yeah, anyway, he with the gods themselves, I think Asimov he received some of that criticism of there's never any sex, there's never any aliens. He didn't like writing about aliens, as I understand it, because one of his early editors, I forget the guy's name, the early editor did not want to have really strong, overpowering alien archetypes. And I think he kind of Asimov kind of played around with having kind of weak aliens, where we're encountering a less time. But he didn't really like doing that either because he didn't want to have aliens be stomped on. This is a conjecture on my part. So he just didn't tend to do it. The other was always the robot. But in the gods themselves, it goes back and forth between this alien civilization, which is a three-gender civilization. And I'll preface this, because he's been dead for a while, I'm okay to do spoilers. If same with you. If anybody listening is like, what? You spoil? Well, okay.
Send all those angry letters to me, and I will read them every night.
Perfect. I will make you the hate mail catcher. Right. But it's the two premises to that particular book are that there's a parallel universe in which the laws of physics are different than our own. So basically, certain elements degrade at a slower pace or a faster pace than ours do. I think they degrade at a much faster pace, and so they're actually shutting down that universe, or it's kind of entropic. Exactly. And they figure out how to transport stuff over to us, and they can swap elements. And the reason they're doing it is because there are different physical properties to elements in their universe and our universe, boron's heavier or whatever, they can kind of, as long as they're able to make the swap, it's like a perpetual energy machine, because they can take advantage of the differential between them, and it's sort of like having like a perpetual waterfall that just keeps going, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff.
It's like their way of fighting entropy, kind of.
Exactly. And there's a little bit of an insidious nature, because they're pretty confident it's going to blow our universe up, but they're like, well, what do we do about that? We
don't know that.
We got to power our smartphones. Like, what can we do? We got these iPhones, but there is sex, and there are aliens. There's really cool tripartite.
Is one of them like a gas stage?
Well, they're all kind of like semi-permeous, gaseous / energy beings.
Right.
And there are these humanoids walking around that are running the show. That you initially assume is like in a different race, and there's this kind of pet race of these three genders of gas, and there's a sort of like caregiver gender which raises the young. There's I
have read that, but it's been a long time ago.
And then I can't remember what the other two genders are. Like, there's one that's more male.
But it's a really interesting take on aliens in general, because he really, if memory serves, he really treated aliens in a very alien way. They were not 100%. Recognizable. They weren't humanoid.
It wasn't
aliens.
Star Trek where you've got different eyebrows,
right?
Or
ridges on the
man, they're very different. They've got noses with wrinkles on
like
them.
Cat eyes. How interesting. I remember reading that and thinking, hey, these are actual aliens. These are surreal and bizarre, and they're not tied to, which is not something I think even a lot of other sci-fi did. Their aliens, to some extent, stayed within some sort of antagonistic type things. You have, computers, or super intelligences or those kinds of things be the enemy, but a lot of times they had kind of humanoid origins or motivations or those kinds of things. But if I remember correctly, that books, the aliens' motivations, some of the aliens, they're very kind of obtuse motivations as well.
They
survival, but
survival is one of them, because they've got the way the genders thing work is that they've got kind of the male and female, and then there's another gender, and I don't remember what the relation is between all of these. And basically, when they mate, they'll produce new versions of themselves, right? But at some point after they've reproduced, they reach like a heightened mating thing where they solidify and they become the humanoid walking around. So it's like they've got three genders and two stages, and it's all of the reproduction's done in the the adolescent stage. And then once they reach adulthood and they're bipeds walking around, they're much smarter, and they're the ones that are actually building stuff, but they're actually cut off from the reproductive cycle. And those guys appear to be the ones that are like, all right, if we just keep sending titanium to Earth, we get a bit of their titanium, we can keep this puppy rolling for a while. And in that book, one of the precursors to one of these physical people kind of cottons on to what's happening and appreciates the cruelty of it. And so when they become that new walking around person, they're able to influence events and kind of tip off the humans. The other benefit of that book that I really like is that the humans are petty. Like, because in most of the regular series, they're not. They're just doing their own thing. But in that one, all of the scientists are just constantly trying to get credit for stuff. Like, they're all trying to get the Pulitzer, or I'm sorry, the Nobel Prize. And I'm like, oh, good. Like Asimov met someone. He's got friends now. So I really enjoy that. But well, so Foundation. Any thoughts on that? Apparently, there's more Foundation novels than I thought. I thought it was a trilogy.
Yeah. So there's actually the original trilogy, and then 4 other books, and there's like a 20 or 30 year gap between them. And so
in terms of when he wrote them,
in terms
of the events?
So I think the original trilogy was written in the 50s, and then the remainder of it was written in the 70s and 80s. And so the remaining 4 books were written after he was married to a psychologist, right? So he was married to, who was a writer in her own right. So she published a lot of stuff under his name, but she wrote like 99% of the books that she wrote, and a lot of like younger adult fiction than Asimov, and kids books and those kinds of things. But she was a psychoanalyst, clinical psychologist. I think that really comes through in that relationship he had with her, like really comes through in the next 4 books.
Interesting, because I mean the first 3, I mean he coined the term robotics, which I did not know. And neither did he. He had assumed that he was like, of course this term already exists, because it's like hydraulics and robots. And then he also coined the term psychohistory, which, among other things, inspired Paul Krugman. Because Paul Krugman basically intuited that economics was macro psychology and decided to go into that in part because of Isaac Asimov. The Foundation series is predicated on the idea that you could have a series of algorithms tabulated by a sage character or some collective of sages that could then intuit, well, we know within the next 300 years there's going to be X event. We don't know exactly how it's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but we know that 200 years from now the economy will implode, and we also know that there'll be a decentralized push, and like really trying to map that out. Which is interesting. He's doing a lot more psychological stuff then, but it's the second part of this, the post trilogy, where he's now married to the psychologist. Yeah,
so he was doing. I think even in his earlier works, he was kind of focused on the psychohistory kind of it all, but he fleshes out way more in the next 4 books. So there's the 5 books of the trilogy. There's 2 sequels to it, which he wrote, and then after which was the Foundation and Earth is there's For the Foundation, and then Foundation and Earth.
You didn't write that down because I want to read that.
And then the prequels are. The name of the book.
Young Hari Seldon.
Yeah, young Hari Seldon.
Basically, he's a detective on the mean streets of the capital planet.
Where he's kind of developing, and what happens too in those last 4 books is that's where he actually ties the robot series into it as well. Cool. So in the original Foundation, it's kind of standalone; they're not integrated at all. And then in those 4 books, it all kinds of turns into one story in one universe with the same primary robot, Daniel Olival or whatever, from the robot books. So and the mystery novels, right? Because they started kind of like hard-boiled aliens in space type. They were robots in space, but what was interesting was he wrote the 2 sequel books and then stopped, and his publisher kept wanting him to write additional books, but he couldn't figure out how to continue the story. So he basically came to this point where there was nowhere else to take the story. Like it's a very complete opus, I would say. Like it really finishes a thought, but it ends in this very cliffhanger, open-ended way. Foundation Earth does, and so I think he just couldn't figure out if there even was anywhere to explore from there in the story, and so he went and wrote prequels. So 2 more books, but the
prequels make sense to me because the timeline, as I recall, is. It's sort of like it's the Roman Empire in space, or maybe the Byzantine Empire, but the Roman Empire, right? So there's an emperor, there's a highly centralized core planet that just sort of through accidents of geography is the hub of the galaxy, but Hari Seldon has foreseen that it is going to fall and fall hard, and so he has a seed planet that will be kind of like a monastery to house all the knowledge and eventually become the new power. And then in the second book, they kind of, or maybe it's the third, they kind of flush out that, well, there is actually a Byzantine model. There's the New Rome, whatever that is, and then there's like a secondary one somewhere out there. We don't know where it is, and we slowly become aware, or at the very end, the cliffhanger is that the other group of people Hari Seldon set up to maintain order and knowledge in the galaxy is this core crypto group on the old home planet. So it's sort of like there's an underground cell in the city of Rome,
and they're spread out, and they're have telepathy, and they can change people's minds and those kinds of things. And so they kind of have mule type powers. And so and Gaia, and that's all connected to Gaia. And so he kind of set up two different systems in case the foundation and the central hub planet and the religion that he started from that and all those things, if that failed, you would still have this backup Gaia. So he kind of ran two plans in parallel. What's interesting in the sequels to that, which came years later, was that that's all set up by a robot, right? So the whole concept.
Wait, is Hari Seldon a robot, or
Hari Seldon is not a robot? But then you go back to the prequels, right? So you find out in the prequels that Daniel terrible that he basically went back and that he met a very young Hari Seldon and basically shepherded humanity through all his experiences, and it was actually his idea to create these two alternate possible futures. And what's really interesting about Asimov, I think, is his approach in looking at the way AI and the way decision-making processes work. And so in the iRobot series, right, you have this idea, and I think Asimov was pretty overt about this, that he basically viewed humans as being very incomplete and kind of a bit of a failed state, and robots were morally superior, right? A positronic brain, you have these three laws, which is three more laws than humans have. And
what are ours? Don't get eaten by a tiger, reproduce a lot, kill anybody that messes with those two things. We've got some programming to us, but it's not as altruistic.
It's it's I see, I take, I came, I saw, I conquered, right?
Yeah.
And so Asimov really, and a lot of his other sub-stories, because he has this whole body of work that's these short stories, right? And with the robot stories as well, you start to see this idea that humans are not really great guiders of humanity. And it's kind of predicated on this idea that there's this very superior or equally valid artificial intelligence that's the positronic brain in robots. And it's very clear that he really thought like the future forward, the way forward, was through kind of robotic intelligence.
Yeah,
right?
He was kind of a top level technocrat in that capacity, because there's a story. One of my favorite stories he wrote, just as a preface to the one I'll mention in a second. There's a character, I think it's Quinn. There's a guy that is a defense attorney, or no, I'm sorry, he's a prosecutor, and he's in a horrible car wreck and he's mangled. And then like 5 years later, after he's not been seen in 5 years, he pops up and he looks great, and he decides to run for mayor. Yeah. And his candidate's convinced he's a robot for a variety of reasons, and like he'll eat a donut on television, and the guy's like, well, he's got a stomach that he installed. He's clearly a robot. And and the whole election becomes this referendum on whether or not he's a robot or not. Yeah. And Susan Calvin is a character in it, and he's trying to work out whether, I'm not a robot, how would I do this? And they're like, well, she's like, you got to punch a guy. And he's like, oh, okay. And so he's at a campaign stop, and a heckler climbs on a stage, is like, you're a robot, and he just socks him in the jaw and cold cocks this guy, and he wins the mayoral race. And at the end of it, Susan's like leaving, and he goes, by the way, interesting thought experiment. If I had built a robot to pretend to be a heckler, I could have punched him if I were a robot. And then the story ends. And so you strongly get the impression. Anyway, he later on becomes some equivalent to like a national leader. And
he is a robot. And he's a robot.
Well, he never clarifies. Susan Calvin thinks he's a robot because he appears in two stories.
Susan Calvin is like a proxy for Asimov himself.
Yeah.
And so Susan Calvin thinks that...
I think
that's what the case is.
And I don't think
Susan Calvin was a bit of a Mary Sue for Asimov.
So Quinn pops up. It's either Quinn or Brisley. I can't remember. He pops up in the first story where he's a prosecutor and becomes mayor, and then later on, like year 2050 or 2060, like world peace has been achieved, and there's really 4 countries that are working in concert, and he's the head of one of these countries. She mentions, I think the story begins with her mentioning that he is dead and she's attending the funeral, and he elected to have his entire body absolutely atomized to destroy any
totally
evidence
not a robot.
that he might have been a robot. I don't know. You know, when I die, I plan to be shot up at a fireworks display. I think that's a great way to go. I want to be cremated in the air in a really badass fireworks display, and then everybody gets drunk and sings Oklahoma.
Ashy taste in their mouth out in Oklahoma.
Well, you know what I'll do? We'll do it over a field in Scotland. That way all the ash will rain down.
It'll taste just like Scotland.
There'll be some vintage where they're like, you know, if you get it from Lefroy and it's 12 years old, you want it, there's a little bit of heating in there. Anyway, like in that particular story, there's these machines that control the economy,
and they start intentionally screwing up.
Because they're trying to, like, there's some contingent of human beings that wants to, like, take power back from the machines, and so they basically intentionally start causing recessions and things to sort of destabilize their movement. I don't remember quite how it winds up, but Asimov would appear to be pretty keen on having, like, can we have a robot judge? Like, he would appear to be perfectly fine with just building robot judges.
And he was also, absolutely. I think he was also really prescient and really kind of appreciated the limitations of a general AI and the limitations of intelligence as well. And like, what was I was reading last night, and I'd never come across this before, but he actually has an explicit statement saying that the thing that makes a person, and that is the best thing about people, is just their intuition. Like, he's on record as saying that, not in a book, not in some sort of fictional form, but just as an explicit quote, the thing that makes people great is their intuition. And like, that's the last 2 books of the Foundation series, in the chronological order, not in terms of when they occurred in the fictional universe, not in terms of when they were written. The last 2 books, the main character, whose name is totally impossible. It's like Golan Trevize or something.
It's like Star Wars squared. One of those weird,
like, totally
damn snaggle.
He's a totally blank-faced guy. Like, he's not a compelling character. Obviously, you're talking about, he's still kind of that, meat suit,
nondescript 30-year-old engineer. Yep.
But his superpower, even though it's not qualified as that, it's just he's kind of in the distribution of a curve of, like, human skill sets. Right? He just has perfect. He's the guy that has perfect intuition.
Malcolm Gladwell.
And so the whole story is basically, and this really ties in very closely with what we have with AI in general now, is that his whole story is that as the reveal comes up that Daniel, the robot, has been manipulating 20,000 years of history.
Is Daniel the one that meets Harry Seldon?
No. So
okay.
By the oldest entity in all of the Asimov, the oldest character is Daniel, who lives to 20,000 years old.
Nice.
So he shepherds, like, the entirety of human history through the whole process, and that's because of the whole Zeroth Law thing, which comes up, which is in one of the robot movies or books, where the Zeroth Law is basically all the 3 principles of the three laws, but applied to humanity as a whole.
Okay.
So you can do no harm to humanity. You have to shepherd humanity. So he basically,
there's like a macro extension.
Right. Exactly. And so he internalizes that, and then the robot's idea is, well, I have to prepare humanity for alien threats, external threats. And so how do you accurately predict that? So he basically spends 20,000 years, and that's why he has the different backups, where he's got Gaia, this living planet, but he also has the whole Foundation process, which is the public thing. And he does that because he doesn't know which path is the right one going forward. And so in the final 2 books, he basically gets Gaia, which is his, like, what he thinks is the best path forward, to find this guy with perfect intuition who always is right, to tell Daniel what path they should go down.
Oh,
so
wow.
He's like the final decider.
Oh, interesting.
Because he has perfect intuition.
So Daniel's the logical, massive, big picture thinker, but this other guy is the intuitive, instinctive, like kind of right brain gut thinker that the robot presumably can't have.
Which, right, exactly. And if you look at if you look at computers in the time period, and even to this day, right, computationally, computers can do way more than we ever could. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to reasoning with missing data and limited data sets, when sparse data sets, humans are still the best at that. right? If you want to reason with incomplete information and make a decision going with your gut, people are still better at that than robots are, right?
Well, I mean, to my knowledge, there's no way to. I could be wrong about this, but random number generators are really not random number generators. They're just a series of equations that take like a clock, and they're like the time is 3:32 p.m. There's 15 different equations that we can apply to that. We're going to do it and create a random number. But it's like, well, it's not like rolling a dice.
Yeah, computational randomness is like not entropy is like the issue, right? There's not enough entropy, and so a lot of times when you have random number generators on computers that are useful and valid, you'll have some external, non-clock driven, like for instance, who is it? GitHub or somebody has a wall of to generate enough randomness for their encryption. They actually have an entire wall of lava lamps, and so the lava it's like 100 lava lamps in a square shape, and they have a camera on it. And so based off of the position of the lava lamps constantly moving, they take that into a bitmap image, and they use that to generate their randomness, right?
Because weirdly enough, so does the Federal Reserve Board. If you go hang out with Powell and Yellen,
it's just lava lamps everywhere.
They're looking at it going,
isn't it a smoky environment?
Yeah, they're all smoking cigars, looking at lava lamps. Yeah,
okay, cigars. That's what they are.
No, that's interesting. That he, because I would not have guessed that about Asimov, that he would so esteem intuition. Yeah, just because he seems like such a logical, plodding thinker that it would not appear to be, his go.
No, yeah, I mean, it's something that he was absolutely. That is man's finest thing. Like that is a thing that you cannot. That nothing beats man at is basically intuitive thinking, right? Which is very strange, right? Because you think, oh, he thinks like a robot. He writes people like robots.
Yeah,
but that's kind of the opposite of what he really valued in people, which is very interesting, I think. But so the robot Daniel cannot determine which path forward is best for humanity, and so he has to enlist the person that's not a Superman or a Supermensch. He's just a normal, random kind of asshole dude. He's definitely not a Han Solo. He's not any of these kinds of things. He's just kind of a jerk, really. But he has a gut feeling. His gut feeling is always right. Right? So it's kind of, so is that a superpower, or does he just tend to guess right? Because in the whole milieu of humanity, there's someone whose guesses have to always be right. Well, statistically, right?
Yeah, and let's say, too, that like if you had the analytical equipment to analyze that. So let's say in theory, there were a sufficiently good computer with a sufficiently good amount of data to chart the person with the highest EQ on the planet.
Right.
Unless that person, by virtue of having like zero of anything else, right? Like they can't talk or something. Assuming they were a functional human being with a high level of EQ, the very highest level of EQ on the planet, that person would appear to be psychic.
Right.
They would appear to have the ability to read minds. They wouldn't be doing it, but they would be so good at being able to look at your face and go, that guy's wife just left him. I can see it in his eyes or whatever.
Right. It's a very Sherlock Holmes almost type experience, right? But it's not as clinical as Sherlock Holmes. It's just purely intuition, right? And so, that's very interesting. And there's a lot of, in the startup environment, because there are so many just nerds who have no emotional intelligence whatsoever. There are certain people, like at Y Combinator and other people, who are like known for, oh man, they have like psychic abilities. And it's just because the people they're surrounding themselves with in the nerd community are so low that there's like sufficiently advanced technology that already exists in startup culture.
So if I want to appear like an EQ rock star, I'm going to be a Betazoid.
Right.
I just need to go to like Bitcoin swaps, and I'll be off the top. I'll be
absolutely
nice.
Yeah. As long as you can earn their trust, then you'll be like. I
have some connections.
You'll be a psychic. You can start your own like nerd psychic hotline, and people would call it all the time. It'd be great.
Nice. Okay, I might well do that. Well, you had mentioned the other night, because we're kind of getting into the contemporary application of Asimov, and a great figure for that is Elon Musk.
Yeah.
So Elon Musk right now, most of the headlines that he has are more to do with SpaceX and private exploration and that kind of thing. But every couple of years, he'll make a big headline because he'll say something to the effect of AI is going to destroy humanity.
Right.
I think he's softened that somewhat, in that now he says that like AI will displace humanity, but we will also probably merge with AI, which is a more transhumanist.
That's pure Asimov is the thing. That is absolutely pure Asimov. And so okay, so if you go back to those two books that are the final books of the series, and you have this character that has immense intuition, right? Perfect intuition, and he's now found kind of the perfect intellectual thinker, which is Daniel. And so they go through the galaxy, they find Earth, they find the moon, they do all these different kinds of things. And so they need...
Which is significant because this is way in the future.
Right, 20,000 years in the future.
Because I can find the moon right now. It's not a problem for me.
Nobody knows where the Earth is. They finally get to Earth, and it's totally desolate. It's been destroyed by war, but Daniel the robot, he's on the moon waiting for them, right? Like he's been around this time. And so, but in the process of doing this, and going on this exploration, they find the only alien outside of the God's book you're mentioning, really the only alien that exists in Asimov's kind of main body of work, which is the Solarians. And so if you go back to the old iRobot books, there was one of the mysteries, the murder mysteries they solved was on this planet where no one actually ever physically saw each other, right? They did this farcasting thing, and basically all the people on this planet were plantation owners, but all the workers were robots. And so you'd have like one person for every 10,000 square miles of land. Well, so...
Australia.
Yeah, basically Australia.
Australia with robots. Sounds terrible.
Robot Australia. Ah, that's great. Yeah, less worry about spiders, less worry about other dangerous creepy crawlers. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I'd look into that. Okay.
We should call Australia and talk to them about this. So anyways, so on their journey to find Earth and to ultimately find this artificial intelligence, which is Danielle, the robotic intelligence, they stumble across the actually only aliens, but they're just people who are 20,000 years removed from other people, and they have the ability to manipulate energy with their minds. They have much larger brains. They live thousands and thousands of years. They're hermaphrodites, so they self-inseminate. So there's no reproductive drive, and there's only on a whole planet the size basically of Earth.
Wait, hold on. Are they? Is it asexual reproduction where they impregnate themselves, or is it just they can swap genders to accommodate whatever the ratio is? They can do both.
Basically, they fully control their genetic history, right? So it's basically like DNA editing, effectively Asimov's version of that, right? They just have complete control of their own evolutionary process, and they don't have like a sexual drive to lead them off course, right? And so as a result, there's a very, very low population density. There's almost none of them. It's mostly robots. On a planet the size of Earth, there's like 10,000 of them. Period. Right? It's mostly robots. But they can control energy with their minds. And in the last regular book of the Foundation series, there's Gaia, and Gaia has telepathy and some of those kinds of powers. But these individual creatures, these like ultra libertarians, kind of, because they're super self-contained.
Huh? You have a really brainy group of people that reproduce asexually and want to have large tracts of land.
Yeah, exactly. Libertarians. So, and Asimov wrote them as libertarians. So he actually took his inspiration for...
Was it just him taking pot shots at Robert Heinlein? they got drunk and they were arguing about the feds or something. He's like, I'll show you, Heinlein.
Weirdest slap fight ever. Heinlein liked it.
Wait, hold on. Asimov actually wrote that's a race of libertarians.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely part of.
Oh man, I'm gonna read this. This sounds great.
Yeah, and so and they're very isolationist as well. They're very isolationist, and so they're like American libertarians with like gene editing, right? Okay. And telepathy and all these kinds of things. So this whole story is kind of leading this idea that this robot intellect has architected these three options for the progress of the human race, but doesn't know which of these three, because he doesn't have intuition, doesn't know which of the three options are the best choice for a robust human existence when it comes to fighting off alien threats, external alien threats.
And this is Daniel we're talking about.
And this is Daniel, gotcha. the robot. And so he brings Golan, I believe is his name. I can never remember his name. He brings the intuitive guy in and tells him, I have rebuilt my own brain so many times. I'm the only creature smart enough, basically, to continue to rebuild my brain. Because as I accumulate information and data, my brain capacity has to continue to increase. And the complexity in which I have to create my brain, I'm the only one who can basically do it. Because I'm 20,000 years old, I'm just like the smartest linear thinker in existence, right? And so things have gotten so complex that I can no longer create new versions of my brain. So I'm dying, right? After 20,000 years, he's actually legitimately dying. It's like the first brain I had lasted...
Or at least he's reached a point of stagnation and he views it as dying?
Asimov and the positronic brains kind of had a bit of a... There was a bit of a continuance, right? So the positronic brain, it wasn't like a soul, but it was like there had to be continuity in the brain, right? And so, for instance, even though he had rebuilt and created a new brain to kind of download all of his information to so many different times, the three laws and the fourth law, the zeroth law, were all still there, right? You can't remove the laws from the positronic brain without destroying.
Yeah, and he says in the book one of the books that were you to try and you would have to disassemble the whole brain to the point of non-use, because it's all predicated on a hardware of those laws.
Exactly right. So it's built into just the very way that data is processed, right?
Yeah.
And so he's rebuilt his brain all these times. And so when his first brain, he said, lasted me 10,000 years, right? But the next brain lasted me half that amount of time. It's because the rate of information he gathered and the rate of data he had to crunch, it was exponential, right? Because you have to take all historical data because if you know intuition, right, then and you're doing everything based off of statistical analysis of the data that you have, then you have to always account for all previous data, right? So the amount of computation you do to correlate these things, right, is a quadratic expansion, right? And so he said, I've had my current brain 600 years, and the level of complexity is so high, I can't create a next better brain. But once I kind of reach, he could create one that was just like his current one, right? But it would immediately kind of seize up. It would lock up because it can't handle any more information.
All the previous stuff. In order to keep that continuity, you'd still have to have the data.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so at that point, he stops to be himself, right? He stops being himself. And so while they're on this libertarian planet, they pick up like a young version of one of these human-esque people that are from, had a divergent point 20,000 years ago. And Daniel presents the intuitive guy with his proposition that if we should, instead of having Gaia, which is a living planet, we should have the next step of human evolution should be Galaxia, which is a living galaxy, and that will be the best. And
you've actually mentioned Gaia a few times. I don't remember Gaia from the Foundation series. Is Gaia like a neural net of a planet? Like it's like
so Gaia was one of the hidden things that was set up by Harry Seldon, which is actually a living consciousness, a living planet, basically.
Okay.
Where what's happened there is all human beings are psychically interconnected, right? So all people are psychically connected to the rocks and trees, and the whole planet is alive and has intellect.
So the whole planet's like a biological neural processor, and it has a sentient.
Right, but it's people. It's still all people. So it's still at this point in time, the only intellect in the universe is still like human intellect. So what they've been able to do is they've been able to imbue rocks and trees effectively. Is kind of how it works. It's a bit hand wavy, but effectively how it works is the rock kind of has human intelligence. It's like brought into the human fold, right? And so rocks think very slowly, but they can store lots of information.
Interesting.
Right? And trees are kind of the same way as well.
Bioprocessors.
Yeah, it's a big bioprocessor, right? Yeah.
Okay, so noting that, then so Daniel is on. He's with Daniel and Golden are on the Libertarian planet.
They're on the Libertarian, yeah. Because Daniel is trying to do what's best for humanity, he's saying, should we let human existence continue to be fractured with this plurality of planets, where if some external threat comes, they may be too fractured to be able to fight off aliens, let's say, or should we take what I've done with this one planet, which is a living consciousness of a planet, where the entire planet is conscious, and do that at the galaxy level, right?
Gotcha.
And so he gives this problem to the intuitive guy, and Golan or something is his name, and ask him to make the decision. Because as old as he is, as old as the robotic thinking is, as much information as he has, he still doesn't have intuition. He still doesn't have this ability to reason based off of missing data. Right. And so he decides. It's a very weird book for an Asimov book, because the intuitive decides that Daniel, the robotic thinker, should have basically a mind meld with this divergent humanoid libertarian child. Okay.
Man, a libertarian with robotic tendencies?
With robotic tendencies.
Can hardly imagine such a thing.
And with 20,000, with 20,000 years of information, it's like practically the same thing, right? So what's really interesting about that book is that the intuitive decides that they should do the mind meld. But the book ends before that occurs. And the way the book actually ends is the adult kind of protagonist character is this intuitive, looking into the eyes of this alien child and basically not understanding anything going on with the child. And so there's this realization in the very last words of the book, because this perfectly intuitive person has also expressed reservations in the past about this alien child. And the realization at the very end is that this child that is about to get merged in with the smartest being in existence, the most, is this libertarian child is
I bet they're not going to have any occupational licensing after that.
Yeah.
They're going to get rid of those occupational licensings for sure.
So fast. There's going to be no permitting
you
at all.
don't need a license to hair braid. That's for damn sure on that planet.
No, they can just do whatever they want. It's great. It's amazing. Not much sex, though, on that planet. I think zero. They fuck themselves. It's okay.
We'll have to consult that graph of optimum orgasm. It might be planned. Like, if you've got a plantation that's 10,000 miles, you don't need to have an orgasm. I don't know. We'll get to it.
That's really all there is to life, is
land ownership.
Huge tracts of land. So land ownership, So, and that is, Asimov ends the book on this like cosmic horror note, where the main character, this intuitive character, realizes that the alien threat that Daniel, this robot, has been preparing humanity for is that child.
Okay. Wow.
It's so good. But it's really different from a lot of those you've wrote. And so but the idea is that when you stop and you read the book and you kind of think about Asimov and things he said outside, you think about the things that he said in the book, the realization is that this character that the robot is about to merge with and merge intelligence with is alien and is probably the end of the human race, but is also effectively the start of a new race of gods, basically. And the alien has come kind of within. And so that's where Elon Musk, I know we're coming back to Elon Musk,
that's great.
But that's where it comes back to with all the neural net stuff that he's working on, is basically whatever threat, it's kind of a hedge. Whatever threat, foreign or domestic, in terms of in galaxy or out of galaxy, the best approach to solving that, I think Elon Musk, and based off of what Asimov was writing, was the merger of human intellect and human intuition and robotic processing and knowledge.
Where we could say like decision making, because there have been very interesting experiments where I don't remember which part of the neofrontal cortex is, the left neofrontal cortex and the right neofrontal cortex, and both of them are the part of us that does. We've got got the reptile core, we've got the mammal brain, and we've got the neofrontal cortex, which is what is really unique to humans, or largely unique. Probably dolphins have them too that are developed, but anyway, squids don't have them, right? We've got them, and if you're damaged, let's say on the left, it tends to impact your emotionality. And there have been really interesting studies where someone's completely capable of talking to you and everything. They're functional, but because they don't have an emotional source anymore, they can't make decisions, because it turns out that human beings are primarily emotional, and we rationalize things after we've made the gut decision. So but this guy would, hey, do you want to meet for lunch next week? And he just couldn't come to he would make spreadsheets. If we could go to Arby's, but you know what? I'd have to drive extra 10 minutes. And he was incapacitated because of his inability to do that. And then to really jump ship for a minute, Vulcans, who are the avatars of logic, are actually very emotional. They still have an emotional core, but the logic is a way of both containing it and actualizing what they're doing.
They put all their effort into suppressing their
but there's still
but the deep passion. They're like Italians inside.
They're Italians on the inside. They're super British. super British on the outside. There's a bunch of British people it's minus the wool. British people living in Arizona. But they need to have that core emotional, if you were in theory to take the Vulcan Vulcan right of, I can't remember what it is, but Spock debates doing it, where you actually purge yourself of emotion. Were you to do that, you would basically be, you wouldn't be catatonic, but you would be reactive. You'd no longer have anything, right? So I could see that being in the kind of Asimov worldview of there has to be that kind of emotional, intuitive, maybe randomness. There has to be some sort of miniature prime mover element to a human being, which allows us to be proactive and that kind of thing. And then with Elon Musk, then I guess the idea would be that we take that core humanity and merge it with all the superpowers we get analytically and in terms of memory.
Because I think he's hedging his bet when he's thinking about these issues, is that if a general AI is created, which there's no reason to think that won't happen eventually, that won't be modeled eventually. If that does happen, then there's not going to be three laws. That's a like a fictional conceit for Asimov to make the story something that you can then pursue. What makes a person good?
It gave him structure in a weird way. It kept him from going down the Frankenstein hole, which he didn't want to do.
Right, and so if in reality we remove that element, then general AI is super super scary, and the best way to fight that is to probably to, as Asimov viewed it, is to basically become something other than human, right? It's something more than, right? So it's kind of the new gods, as it were, and that's very much the way, a lot of Asimov stuff is not. Asimov didn't write stuff that was like xenophobic or cosmic horror. He wrote these big picture type things like The Last Question, where it's like the universe is cyclical and humanity just exists, and like sentience just exists to create a computer that can ask the question that basically reboots the universe, all these kinds of things.
That's the problem of entropy in that story, right?
Right. Yeah. And so and he also wrote about The End of Eternity as another book that he wrote, which explores this group of special agents who can control time and who ensure that there's fewer wars, that there's existence of the human race, and the main character is part of this time core, but they can never get past a certain date in history where they have to loop back and start all over again because humanity just ends and they have no insight into it. They don't understand what's going on. And so, they've been working so hard to control and factor in, based off of all external stimuli from time and space, how to keep humanity from wrecking itself, and they go in and assassinate people and do those other kinds of things. But then humanity always ends. Humanity always ends at year 242, right? And they've never figured out any way of getting past the date. The apocalypse always happens. And so in that story, this protagonist character realizes that the end of eternity, which is the name of the organization, to destroy these time meddlers is to usher in infinity, which means that our own kind of desires to control and change things and shepherd things is actually what prevents us from having enough diversity to face unknowns, right? And so by destroying this meddling time corpse, things get much more wild and humanity kind of goes crazy, has much weirder aberrational behaviors and things that occur with
Game show host.
Oh, that's what happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've been positing for a while. By the way, I'm positing that we actually live in a sitcom universe.
Yeah,
that, like,
I think so.
In the regular universe right now, President Huntsman's running his re-election campaign, and but in our universe, we've got a game show host. Yeah.
Right. We live in a simulation, and it's run by 4chan.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's also a distinct possibility.
Boom, mind blower. Yeah.
I choose to live in the sitcom universe where Scaramucci was a fun week.
Right. There's always
a really good episode. We had that guy on.
Yeah, I gotta wait for that first episode to end though at some point, right?
So to go back to Musk, then, is Musk, has he attributed a lot of his fear of AI to Asimov, or do you think it was just kind of in the milieu and he soaked in it?
I mean, I think that it's absolutely he's soaked in it. He has obviously, he's communicated that he was really big into Asimov. That Asimov was something that he read and was a big part of his formative thinking.
Right.
And if you actually read what he's saying about AI specifically, it's ripped straight from the books of Asimov, right? It's humanity, and that's where when he backed down. I wonder if someone talked to him and was like, hey, did you not read those last few books? Because when he backed down, the way that he backed down from kind of scaremongering, if you want to call it that, or prescience or whatever, with general AI was, Neuralink is the way to do it, and that's ripped straight from the last page of Asimov.
We're kind of angling towards. So I didn't work for Congress for very long, and this was 10 years ago now when I worked for Congress, and even then, as a staffer, you get invited to various events, and there'll be like the Defense Department will put on an event, which is really just an excuse to drink and flirt with other 20-somethings. But I mean, occasionally I'd accidentally educate myself on something.
Right.
And I went there, and again, 10 years ago, they had a headset you could put on, and using your beta waves. So by thinking about it, you could move a cursor on the screen.
Yeah.
And they had this kind of rudimentary game where you could make a ball jump up and down.
Right.
But it was, I mean, I watched this and I was like, that is some spooky stuff right there. And for their purposes, what they were trying to do was develop technology to help paralyzed veterans. Eventually get to the point where they could move a robotic
They could run
arm.
the drones to kill us all.
Exactly.
Paralyzed veterans, they're the ones we got to watch out for.
Don't worry about it, Bob. We're just going to plunk you down in a bunker in Nevada, and you can still shoot stuff in Pakistan.
That's right.
But I mean, 10 years ago, I was like, oh wow. I mean, like that is a very rudimentary form of mind-machine interface technology, and I'm sure that it's progressed more than that. They've also, I read a story, and I need to follow up on this. I read a story where there was some very minor amount of data that someone could transfer. Like they had like a way of directly transferring data in the mind to a memory stick.
Very recently they've come like a mind-to-mind Neuralink is like a very recent thing.
Which should be freaky.
And it's a very low transmission rate, but I mean it'll get higher.
You think about like it would be fascinating, and I hope this. I'm very bullish on technology, and I'm more in the transhumanist thumbs up camp.
Absolutely.
Like it would be pretty cool if like as I get older, and particularly as I drink whiskey, if I had like a thing I could plug into the back of my skull that would be like, hey, be sure to keep these memories. Remember your daughter's wedding. Also, like all the Spanish you learned in high school is just going to be the touch of a finger. You don't have to like that would be a pretty handy thing to have. And so I don't know.
Well, we're kind of already that way, right? Like we're already augmented people, right? The first moment that the washer machine for laundry was invented, right? We instantly became transhumanist, all of us, right? And every housewife and every house husband, right, became transhumanist the moment they didn't have to bend over a fucking wash basin.
I'm gonna back up way back. So like I will argue that we've always been transhumanist, but the ratio has been like 99.9 to 1. So like for example,
we're just changing the
the amount and profundity of the technology. So for example, human beings and probably our predecessors, I don't remember, let's say Homo erectus, whatever comes right before us, right? They had cooking pots that they would use to cook, and it's basically an external stomach. So like if you've got a cow, cows have like 4 stomachs or 7 stomachs or something. So they're able to eat this very raw vegetable protein, and it because it goes through these 7 stomachs, it's able to digest it. Well, we don't have that. We've got 1 stomach, so we developed literally an external stomach that we could process food with and break it down before eating it. And we're getting much more. So, like I'd say we are cyborgs because everyone I know, myself included, is never more than 3 feet from their smartphone, which is connected to the World Wide Web and everything else.
Well, I mean, from an energy consumption standpoint, there's no creature on Earth that takes up a larger footprint than an individual human does, right? So we think about the largest creature on Earth is the blue whale, right? And so blue
whales
don't
have feet. That's why I didn't know.
But the reason why a blue whale is so big and they live so long is because they have this, surge feeding technique, and they can go, months and months and maybe even years between meals, because when they eat, baby, they eat, right? They're, ribs and barbecue in Texas, but in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or Pacific. And so, but they have to store and keep that with them, right? Whereas with people, I don't even own any food, I think, at the moment, right? I have to go down to the grocery store or go down to, a restaurant or a fast food place, but I effectively have that food at my disposal. That's something I'm fully augmented. I don't even have to do the cooking anymore, so we take up, as a result of that, even the smallest of us take up this kind of outsized footprint where we're batting in terms of carbon footprint or whatever, what have you. We're batting way above our actual weight class.
Take that, dolphins.
Take that, fucking whales. What have you done for us lately?
Yeah,
anyways?
where are your smartphones? You don't even have opposable thumbs.
You're dumb. Dumb whales.
Well, so as we round it out then, now at this point, we're coming up on an hour. I presume anyone that has made the journey with us is probably somewhat familiar with Isaac Asimov.
Yeah.
But if someone was just in love with the sound of your voice, Ryan, and decided to go through it, they don't know Asimov, what would you recommend starting somebody out on if they were gonna get into Asimov?
I really think that all of his early robot series.
Me too. That's what I recommend.
The thing about him that's so great, and The Last Question is a really good one too. All of his short stories and all of his, iRobot's not really one book, right?
No,
it's a series of short stories. And those are all, they're really easy to consume, really easy to understand. Start there. They're kind of great stories that explore what it is to be a human, what it is to have a mind that thinks, and how that's different from other ways of thinking and unique. And then from there, the Foundation series for sure.
Yeah. I think it's safe that I'll put in the plug for the gods themselves once you want a full meal of Asimov. Yeah. But
The Last Question is it's one of the all-time great short stories.
Yeah. Because that one, if I'm going to spoil it, I believe the problem they're fighting entropy the whole time, right? So they're getting smarter and smarter, and it's like the scope of the story is millions of years.
Yeah.
Because at one point, like
it's all of the existence. It's all of existence.
Humanity is just one massive consciousness, and then it gets even bigger to where like the universe itself is one giant brain, and it's like, oh no, I'm going to die. And I won't spoil it completely, but the end of the story is consciousness figuring out how to combat the problem of entropy.
Right. Yeah, it starts at the Big Bang basically, and it goes to, in a short story, starts at the Big Bang and goes to the heat death of the universe, or the cold death of the universe, and then there's another chapter after that, right? So it's like, what happens after the end? What happens after the thing? And is there a thing after the end? And it's a really brilliant kind of approach to thinking about the problem.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, having been reading up on him in preparation for talking to you, man, I feel stupid in comparison to Isaac Asimov.
What a smart guy.
And he would also apparently was very congenial in meeting fans. He would go to science fiction conventions and would be very patient. And I've had this experience a few times where I used to hang out with Michio Kaku, and I'd hang out with him in the green room, and I'm asking him questions, and I got to be asking him stupid questions. Like I can't, I'm sure that if he were a meaner, but he was just patiently explaining. Here's why, it eventually we got to a good point where, he mentioned something about how elephants don't get cancer, and I was like, so if I start eating elephants, and then he got, oh, you're a funny person, cool, man. But in Asimov's case, clearly off the charts in terms of intelligence, also productivity off the charts.
I mean, he wrote so much. I think 500 books.
500 books is what I read. Yeah.
I don't know if this is still true, but I mean, my understanding is that he had more books published, if you include all of his short stories, which were published independently of each other, that he's the most prolific author the United States has had.
He might well be.
Because, 500 plus books, and that's just his, kind of works of fiction or the things that were officially published.
Man, okay, so I've got 3 published books now. I've got 3 unpublished books. If I finish up all the books that are unpublished or that could be published, I'm up to 10. Right? So for me to outpace Isaac Asimov, and that is now my goal.
Good goal.
I'm going to have to get some kind of neural implant and live to be, at my current pace, about 300.
Well, that's the theory, right? Is that Asimov was autobiographical, right? He was the robot.
Oh, man, he's the Quinn.
He's the guy.
He's like, his wife's like, you're not a human, you can't punch anybody. Then he decks a hobo, but then the hobo screws his eye back into his orbital socket and goes into it. Yeah,
that's definitely what happened. Yeah.
Cool, man. Ryan, this was a great conversation. We met the other night, and you started talking about Asimov, and I was like, I want to bring that guy onto the show to talk about Asimov. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be part of it.
Hey there, Positronic buddy. This is the second proper episode of Alienating the Audience. If I were a robot, I wouldn't need a lot of feedback or personal gratification, but I'm a human. And so I'm basically a bucket of organs constantly demanding ego validation. So if you enjoyed this episode, I would greatly appreciate it if you go on iTunes and give it, 50, 60 stars and a pretty stellar review. Thanks, robot. Part of being a comedian is you do a lot of road work. And I am a comedian, and my friend Nick Sperduti, he is a comedian as well. And so we're out there on the open road cracking jokes all the time. We like to travel together because it can get kind of lonely. So we vagabond together. And most recently, we went to the Fembot homeworld, which I loved.
I mean, first of all, I don't even think that's proper anymore. I don't even think we can say Fembot.
Yeah, well, okay. Real quick, I'm just going to... This is something Nick and I were arguing about the whole way back. You're supposed to call them replicants. But you know who doesn't say that? fembots. The whole time I was there, I
Yeah.
never heard a fembot ask me to call her a replicant. They said fembots, I said fembot. The only people saying replicant are uptight white people on the way to or from the fembot homeworld. Yeah, I had a great time. The comedy was okay. The comedy was okay. I didn't. They weren't. They were. It was a polite audience. They laughed okay, but it felt kind of perfunctory. Like it felt like they knew when to laugh, but they didn't actually get the humor.
Listen, as far as the comedy goes, they were laughing, but it was as if they've watched an episode of The Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
And it was just them going by such a routine to laugh. Like it was very hard to listen to.
That was okay. There was that one point about halfway through my bit, my routine, where a woman on the third row yelled, "Is that a joke?" And I said yes, and then she just started uproariously laughing.
Yeah.
And it was like, on the one hand, I appreciate the confirmation of it. I'm glad that but it did feel kind of contrived. But Tinder was fantastic. I hit up Tinder every time I go to a new planet. And
well, it's not that difficult when you're every person that you swipe right on is already starting a conversation with you.
They were great, and they weren't even. There was just no beating around the bush. It was just like you're acceptably attractive. Come over to my apartment for sexual maintenance. And I was like, I don't know what sexual maintenance is, but I'm down. And
yes, you do.
I knew exactly what it was. I knew exactly what it was. And this is just a pretty fun trip, really. Here's the thing I like about the fembots, okay? And they get a lot of crap because they're conniving and trying to take over humanity. And I acknowledge that. But also a lot of humans do that too. You got to acknowledge that. Like there have been plenty of humans that have tried to take over humanity, and then the fembots do it. And they're
not as bad when they're on their own planet. At least
No.
then it's like, well, you don't really have much to worry about because they've already have their planet, right?
Yeah, and then the other thing too is that do you know who I didn't have to have conversations about feelings with? The 4 fembots I dated.
Oh my God,
there was none of that. There was no talking about feelings.
What about when the bus driver exploded?
Yeah, no one talked about that. He blew up, and they were like, well, we should go on another bus. And I was like, these are very self-directed, rational people that I can hang out with. Like, they're not... I went on a date with a fembot while I was there, and you know what she didn't make me do? Go apple picking. That was not a part of that. This is the lowest pressure, lowest maintenance group of people I've ever met.
Well, I will say that the FICF is always a fun place to be at, and it's very enjoyable. Personally, I had a good time. I really felt like I had some of my best material, and Heaton, I'm always happy to be there with you, buddy.
I wanted to ask you something.
Sure thing.
You hated the fembot homeworld the first couple of days we were there. You clearly did not like it.
No, I don't remember that. I don't think so.
No, I'm looking at a text message, and it says, I hate this place. I hate the replicant homeworld, which kudos to you there, Nick, for using the proper terminology.
Well, it is the proper, yeah.
Yeah, well, anyway, you hated it. But then the fembots, kind of, I don't know if they invited you to something or what, but you disappeared for 2 days, and you came back, and your whole attitude had changed. Like, you seemed calmer and more rational. Are you a replicant that they replaced my friend with? Are you Nick or a replicant?
Heaton.
Good old Nick, always being jolly when I ask him questions.
I think that it was just a great time, and of course I'm not a replicant. That would be crazy. Okay, first of all, wouldn't you be able to tell if I was a replicant? You and me, we go back years. Wouldn't you be able to tell if I was not me? I'm me. I mean, of course I'm me. Who else would I be? I'm Nick. I'm always Nick. I'll always be Nick. I love you, Heaton, my good old buddy.
You do say that a lot. Yeah, you do say I'm Nick, I'll always be Nick a lot. Okay, all right, there was this one weird moment, though, where when we got back from the fembot homeworld, I invited you over to see my magnet collection, and you flipped out. When I handed you a magnet, you flipped out. And you've always liked my magnet collection.
Well, sometimes you just have to be responsible with those sort of things. You got to keep them where they're supposed to be. And maybe it's just not generally a good idea to just keep them out in the open like that. Maybe you could lose them, or they could get bent or broken. And, you don't want that, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Because then what good is a collection if it's bent and broken and bad,
Okay. I guess you make a good point about my magnet collection. I'll be more careful with that in the future. It just seemed odd at the time because you reacted as if it would actually physically damage you. Also, you've been reading binary, like books in binary, because I saw you'll just sit in front of a computer and you're just reading these scrolling ones and zeros. And I'm like, that's cool that you learned a new language. I support that. Like, I tried learning Spanish on Duolingo last year, and I got kind of tuckered out. But in your
that's
case,
exactly where I learned binary. You can learn it on there, Duolingo. And here's the thing: when you go to another planet, you want to be respectful and learn their language. So I did. So you did mention that whole bit about me going to a room for a couple of days.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening, I don't think I actually told you the story, but what ended up happening, so Trisha, if you remember Trisha.
Oh, yeah, I remember Trisha.
Trisha brought me to the Capitol, and she showed me around. I told her I was getting a tour that day, and what ended up happening was I accidentally stumbled upon some stuff that they don't really like to talk about. And so they just detained me for a couple of minutes just to talk, but they were very polite about it. They fed me and everything. And the food over there, wonderful, by the way.
Yeah.
Could not have loved it more. And what happened was they said, hey, you're a really great, funny comedian. And so is Heaton.
They did?
Your good old buddy. And I said, yeah, they did. And I said, yes, he is great. As am I. Thank you. And then they gave me some gifts. They also gave me this special patch that helped me to learn binary faster. And then they sent me on my way.
Well, you know what I do appreciate, Nick? You were considerate enough to send me text messages so that I wouldn't worry, because being your traveling companion, if you disappeared for 48 hours without calling me, I would have been really worried. But you sent me, okay, here's a text message you sent me at 11 p.m. It says, hello, it is me, your human friend Nick. And I'm like, well, that checks out. Glad to know that Nick's okay. And then it said, don't worry, I'm staying with some Fembot friends, still human. And then it just says insert emoji, which is, okay, makes sense. I can kind of pick whichever emoji I want. And you had several like that where they're all said, I'm fine and I'm very human. And I'm like, well, those are the two things that I'm most concerned about. So good to know.
Yeah. Well, classic me. I'll tell you what. I'm just, that's just, it's me. I'm human, and I'm Nick, and it's me. Who else could it be? It's Nick. It's me, Well,
that is ironclad, a pro-human Nick material right there. So that's all I need, buddy. If you say you're human, that's enough for me.
I think that it should be.
Well, good. Anyway, I guess that's it. We'll travel to another planet in the future, and I'll be more careful with my magnet collection.
I'll see you next time, Heaton, my good old buddy.
That's the show. We did it, you guys. Thanks, Ryan McGary, for coming on to share his impressive wealth of Asimov knowledge. Thanks, Nick Sperduti, or possibly the Sperduti replicant, for making interstellar comedy just a little more fun, a little less lonely. Thank you, Taylor Standridge, for audio engineering. Hey, you know what we haven't talked about yet? Motherfucking Star Trek.